The Art of Flow.
Welcome to The Art of Flow, a podcast that explores connecting with your body, mind, and soul via movement arts and creative exploration. Through conversations with movement artists, circus performers, flow artists, and fire dancers. My name is Morgan Dalgano, and I'm the creator and host of the podcast, a flow arts enthusiast and a life coach. Welcome to another episode of The Art of Flow. Today we'll be talking with Srikanta Barefoot. Srikanta Barefoot has a breadth of experience in circus, theater, and dance. He boasts an extensive performance history, including 3 years and over 700 shows as the featured fire dancer, fire dance coach, and lead character for Cirque du Soleil. Regarded as a leading figure in the fire dance community, Srikanta teaches workshops and retreats and has published an instructional video series on dancing with the fire staff. He performs a variety of circus disciplines, including sear wheel, cube, clown, body percussion, boleadoras, percussion, and is ever in pursuit of his latest muse. His company, Fusion Arts, is in the south of France, where Srikanta works as an artistic director, choreographer, and performer. He also designs and sells custom-made professional fire gear, including poi, ropes, titanium fire staffs. Today we'll be talking about his work as a full-time performer. You can find out more about how to connect with Srikanta in the show notes below. What was the first moment you picked up a flow prop like?
So actually the first flow prop I ever picked up was the devil sticks. And I was 14 years old. And I totally fell in love with that. I became totally obsessed. And I actually used to sneak out of the house and go downtown and put a hat out and busk until, my parents were notified by their friends that I was doing that. But anyway, I guess I was pretty passionate about it and totally hooked from a young age.
I remember playing with the devil sticks when I was younger. Our parents would throw them at us and be like, occupy yourself while we're in between places or in airports. But I was always jealous of folks who could do the big tosses or keep it rotating. And the fact that you went out and you brought your skills to the public and started busking, that's so cool.
Yeah, I guess I felt pretty passionately about it. And I guess I wasn't shy at the time. Maybe more shy now.
Would you then consider that the start of your performance career? Or is there another time when you started performing?
Yeah, so I had definitely been performing already. I was fortunate enough to go to an art school growing up. So singing and acting and dance were part of the regular curriculum, which was great. And we also did these really elaborate musicals. Actually, probably, at the time, it was the most elaborate children's productions happening in the States. And, every year we do the Ramayana, which is the epic story of India. And dry ice, smoke machines, fire breathing dragons, we'd have these epic fight scenes. And anyway, it was a great training for me for what I ended up doing in life. I mean, maybe because of that, but I was already choreographing, as a child and creating fight scenes with the staff and everything. So I started really young.
Wow, that's so cool. So it was kind of the base of your performance knowledge and gave you this really strong start going forward and vocabulary to work with.
Exactly.
How did you get started fire dancing?
Yeah, so the fire dance part came a bit later, obviously. So yeah, the first fire dancer I ever saw was this girl on the beach in my hometown, Santa Cruz, California. And she ended up being my first girlfriend. And so just kind of that way, she had her poi around, she had just begun. And I just picked them up one day pretty early on after we'd met. And I remember it was this day on the beach and I just picked them up and she taught me the forwards figure eight. And then within an hour, I was totally hooked. I'd already figured out how to make quarter turns, half turns. And I saw, the potential. And so so many of us, I was hooked. and then after it was I previously had some martial arts training with the staff, the Indian martial arts training with the staff in that school where I grew up. and so I was able to apply that, and yeah, so, but that's how I started fire dancing. And then it was so fun because, it was just our group of friends, and this is like more than 20 years ago now. So there was no YouTube, there was no, we were just like figuring it out. And then occasionally like somebody from out of town would come in and they'd have a different style. And then, like isolation, we used to call that Seattle style. And because nobody knew what it was just this guy in Seattle. And then when I moved up there, in Pyro Sutra, we were calling it magic, but it just looked like magic. We didn't analyze it and think of what it was, until years later. But just to say, like, it was so fun at that time just to experiment and find moves and discover things and name moves. Like we had all these silly names for moves. So it was a really fun time.
Names are really powerful. It's interesting to talk with folks who are spending like 10 years ago before they were more standardized and hear the variety of names that were chosen for different moves. I like magic a lot.
Yeah. We got creative with the names.
And it kind of sounds like you had some like prop crossover, or people cross train with different props in order to, and they find that the ideas and concepts translate really well. And that happened for you with staff, but staff of a different style.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm always trying to encourage my students to do more than just one prop, even if they're like super passionate about poi or passionate about staff. Like, those two props specifically, they teach a lot to you, with the staff or the double staffs. You're going to learn something about poi, which is going to teach you about something about double staff, and then double swords, and it's kind of like all connects, right? So yeah, absolutely. And I think it is important to explore with different props, and it's something I'm still doing, to this day. I just started spinning dragon staff and rope dart, and still, 20 years on, I'm still exploring new things.
And what inspires you to go and join Cirque du Soleil?
There was already like traditional fire knife acts, like in Alegria, and I was like, yeah, like contemporary fire dancing should be on the world stage, and I want to do it.
Can you tell us a little bit about your time working for Cirque du Soleil? What were your biggest joys, and what were your lessons that you learned?
When I got hired for the show, it was a new show, and they hired me to be, I was the only fire dancer hired, but I was also supposed to teach 20 acrobats and dancers to kind of back me up in the act. I mean, the stage is huge, and they hired me because I move a lot and I can fill the space, but the stage is like really huge. And so, we ended up choreographing like, they would go in the back with some simple moves with poi, and it got more elaborate over the years that I was performing the act. But yeah, so they hired me to be the featured fire dancer, the coach, to teach those guys during my act, and then also to be the shaman. So I was like this guy, like going around space playing the flute, and it was all pretty cool. And yeah, what I learned, like, well, first of all, I had this expectation, like, there was 9 months of creation. I'm like, oh man, those Cirque du Soleil artists, they're so good, they're just gonna replace me like that, and I'll be, forgotten about. But one of the first things I learned is like, those guys are so like into their niche, like, tango dancers, hip hop dancers, body percussionists, or acrobats, or whatever, they're so specialized that it's not the easiest thing for them to just pick up object manipulation, understand the planes and everything like that. So, that kind of helped with my confidence to be like, oh, I'm, I do kind of have something unique, and I'm also like combining it with acrobatics and dance. And so, yeah, it helped with my confidence. The next thing I probably learned was to deal with the stage fright. Because yeah, it's just, and to this day, like, I remain someone who always has stage fright, no matter what the scale the performance might be. And so what I've learned, and just, by doing so many shows, we're doing like 8 to 12 shows a week, 700 shows over 2 years, like you get into this rhythm, and every time what I learned is like, it's stage fright is not my enemy. It's actually my friend, because like the moment I step on stage, it transforms into presence, and all that like jittery, like horrible energy you just want to like silence, actually, like somehow, I don't even know how, it's not like I've mastered it. It's just like I have faith that it happens because it does happen, if that makes sense. So that was a good lesson too. And yeah, what else did I learn? I mean, doing 8 to 12 shows a week, 6 days a week, you know, you learn to pace yourself, you learn how to rest, you know, you learn how to have your energy peak during that 5 minutes of your act every day. You learn how to recover from making mistakes. So, you know, like I remember once at the beginning of, you know, I had like this dramatic moment coming on stage as the shaman, like with my staff and the drums and everything. And I wanted to do this new move. It was like this contact move, kind of like making it go around and back up here and like down. And it just went like, you know, like the beginning of the 5-minute act. And it just like falls on the stage, just like, yeah, so, and there's no rewind, right? So how to recover from that. And well, fortunately, by that point, I'd had some experience and was able to stay in character. And even though it felt horrible, still, you know, keep some respect and maintain my demeanor, I guess. So yeah, there were a lot of lessons.
I'm really curious to know about your energy cycling. It sounds like you kind of changed some habits or made some modifications to your schedule so that your energy would peak during performance time. Can you tell us more?
In retrospect, compared to what I do now as a freelance artist, you know, it was all pretty peachy. Like you just had to worry about one thing, which was pretty awesome, right? But yeah, I mean, there was a physical consideration to allowing yourself enough rest. I mean, you know, you're surrounded by 70 other artists who are living their dream too, and we're all getting paid well, and we're all like young and healthy and want to go out and party. So you have to kind of learn like to take it easy, to allow yourself enough rest. I mean, definitely there were times when we didn't, but yeah, like, you know, eating well, and oh yeah, there was definitely, like, on that note, like learning how to breathe, because my act was like very ambitious and very physical. And, you know, I would be going down the lift with my swords at the end of the act, like on my back on the floor for the first 6 months, just like panting, you know. But, you know, learning when to take your breaths, when you can't take your breaths, because you've got to use your core to jump or to do something. So yeah, it really becomes like a rhythm of breathing too during the act.
And I'm curious, what was the experience with the audience like?
The public really does count. It really does matter. You know, even in the Cirque du Soleil, where you've got lights in your face and you can't necessarily see the public, you know, half the time you're kind of faking it, you know, faking that you're seeing them. But like, it really does matter because, you know, there in Macau, we had mainly like a mainland Chinese audience, and we were struggling to get enough people into the theater. It was a new show, you know, and people would arrive late, they would sleep sometimes, they would be drunk. And so we really got like very little interaction from the public, which is ultimately like one of the hugest reasons why I decided to quit. But a couple of times we were lucky enough to get, we had Indian audiences a couple of nights when we did the Indian Film Awards, and we had Japanese audiences a couple of nights. And it was in those moments when I realized that we actually do have a good show. It actually does work. It actually, you know, it was so reassuring because we were getting that you know, energy coming back from the audience in the form of applause, in the form of, you know, we felt that they were there. So yeah, it taught me that it is important.
It's so interesting because I imagine you can't even see people given the lights, and yet you're still aware of the gaze and the attention, or there's some quality that alerts you to what's going on beyond the edge of the stage. I'm also curious though, because you mentioned, you know, this happened a long time ago. This was like 10 years ago, and you've been doing a bunch since then. I looked at your personal site, and you've really diversified what you work in because you're no longer just fire. Can you tell us about that transition and how your career shifted after you left Cirque du Soleil?
Sure. Yeah. So you know, and again, it's been 10 years, so there's been several chapters in all of that, of course. But yeah, the first chapter was definitely one of hardship, I'd say, and regret. I mean, you know, like I had wanted to go on and do things, and the grass was greener. And so I quit, and I went on, and then it was like, oh, global financial crisis, like, oh, like, so all these things happened, and I also moved to France. I had to learn the language before making connections to do shows. And so it was like, it was quite a difficult kind of wake up call. And and it was just after that, like, so much trial and error to kind of learn how to make it work and how to make ends meet. And so, yeah, like, diversifying has definitely been a huge element, I mean, right away, when I didn't have the connections for shows afterwards, I started teaching. And through teaching, I had students who wanted the kind of fire tools I use, which are like super lightweight and custom made from the Fusion Arts Fire Shop, I should say. And so I started the shop on the side. And so it was kind of like diversifying in that way. And I've kind of maintained that kind of triangle of like, the shop, instruction, and teaching, and they kind of feed off of each other in some ways. I mean, 99% of my income is through doing shows, but those two things are always there, like if and when, like, there's a global pandemic, for example. So yeah, it does work out. And then the other thing I realized, at least here in France, was like, it was going to be really hard to make ends meet just performing fire. There wasn't enough opportunity to pay the bills, like just performing fire. So I had to do more than that. And so, of course, an easy evolution was doing light dance acts. I mean, that was around the time, this is like 10 years ago, when the LED props were starting to get to the caliber where it could be presentable, on a professional level to do shows. So I started creating, I started performing a little bit of light dance. I didn't totally develop it until about 2016, when I really made an act out of it, because I was a bit resistant, because I didn't totally love it. It wasn't fire, it wasn't alive, and I had to find my way to like it. But that, and then also the steer wheel, which is something I picked up backstage at the Cirque du Soleil. I developed that into an act. And I had one of the first LED steer wheel acts, in 2013, and something I've continued to create. I'm just looking over my shoulder here. I've actually got my steer wheel here in my office for the past 6 months. I'm programming new shows with an amazing pixel wheel. So yeah, diversifying, and that's been a big part of it, big part of the learning curve.
So listeners, check out Fusion Arts by clicking on it in the show notes below. There is amazing content from Srikanta on there. There's also retreats if you're interested in joining and connecting with a global community of spinners and learning new skill sets. They look wonderful. They're like week-long or 2-week-long experiences. I'm sure Srikanta could tell us a little bit more. But before we dive into that, I'm curious, you mentioned that at first you didn't like LED, but you made this transition. How did you, what helped you make that transition?
Right. So, as I said, like, I think like the props by now, they've definitely come to a place where it's super interesting. Like, like I'm able to program like every single pixel of my pixel props to like do amazing things. And it's become a great tool, in the past few years. But prior to that, yeah, I was resistant to it, just because, as I said, like, the fire feels so alive. It's almost like a partner. It's like something equal on stage with me. That's how I feel with the fire. But the LED always felt like so cold and just so lifeless. And so in 2016, I moved here to the south of France, and I said, okay, like, Shri, like, if you could have some LED acts, like solo, duo, group acts, like, it would open up some doors, and it'd be a good thing. So you have to try to like it. So I invested in some staffs and some poi from Paratera, so really good quality props. And then, I knew that the act needed to kind of end with something bigger and more amazing. So I actually chose to learn the cube and order an LED cube. And so I taught myself the cube in order to finish this solo act that I created, and then from there, it's just kept going, into LED tetrahedrons and the LED square, and then, you guys all know the rest.
All the shapes, get all the shapes.
All of the geometrical objects, sacred and not.
And could you tell us a little bit about the retreats that you run? I know they're probably on hold because of COVID, but soon we'll pass through this and I'm sure they'll resume.
Yes, we shall smote the ruin, this ugly beast. Yeah, so the retreats, it's something I started doing right after I quit the Cirque du Soleil, these week-long retreats, and it's kind of like combining adventure and like a new place. So, we've done it in Costa Rica, we've done it in Stromboli and Italy, and most recently, so now, normally, I'm supposed to do like 3 annual retreats, so it's like one in Bali, that's like more like adventure and flow. There's one here in the south of France. It's like a half an hour away from where I live. Like, I'm just right here in the Mediterranean, so it's like really cool area, and it's all about like helping people to build their acts. So like really like dialing in and like getting into individual help with like cutting music and working on choreography and stage presence and all the theatrical elements. And then there's another kind of animal that we're going to start doing in Barcelona, actually, in this village close to Barcelona that's really charming. And that's kind of a blend of the two. So it's like a lot of technique, point staff technique, and a bit of adventure too, and a bit of culture. So yeah, it's always a good time. It's kind of become like one of the only times I get to connect with the community, because I'm not someone who's super active on Facebook or in my around here. Maybe it exists, but I'm not even like active enough to know if there's like fire jams and stuff. So I tend to kind of like isolate and keep in my creative bubble. But then those weeks are like such an amazing moment for me to check in with people and like connect, and it's a really good time.
It's so important to carve out an opportunity and time to connect with community and also exchange knowledge and kind of highly focus in on creativity together. Though you say you're not active very much on Facebook, I know that you've started a Facebook community and group around the full body dance-based approach to fire dancing, something that is a term you coined. And folks who are interested in joining this, you can look in the show notes below, check it out there. And I'm curious, why are you passionate about this particular form of artistic expression and seeing it evolve?
Yeah, so I created the term and the group dance-based fire dance, basically because I believe in the potential for the art form. And I think the art form can go down multiple paths. This could just be maybe one path, but it's definitely the path I obviously feel the most passionate about. And it came from just having a background in dance and theater, and then kind of seeing the potential for fire dance, but then also seeing like how it was incomplete, or how I would meet a lot of artists. For example, if I was trying to create a group show, I'd be working with artists who would know how to do something on one side, but had never thought to try it on the other side, which is quite limiting when you're creating a group show, or artists who don't know how to count, music, but we're trying to create something like synchronized. So it's like, okay, dance and theater have developed some really important rules and concepts that we can draw from, just to kind of, I guess, firstly clean up the art form, and then also just make it more powerful and more, not only more respected, because I think there is an issue with respect when you're in the circus community. People are like, oh, fire dance, that's cheating, like it's too easy. And I think, we kind of get a bad rap, which is too bad. So cleaning it up, and then just kind of, I guess, making it more effective, like making it more powerful, like the use of space, the use of your body. What are all the different ways in which you can move and be on stage, and what are you saying, and what's the energy of the piece, and really thinking about all those elements as you would if you were creating a theatrical or a dance piece. So that was the impetus for creating dance-based fire dance. And it's a group that anybody can join if you're interested in that side of fire dance. Just ask to join and say why. And as long as I tell that you're not trying to sell cell phone cases or something, I'll say yes.
Thank you so much for creating a knowledge repository for that cross-section of skill sets. It's really interesting because it's a wide breadth of tools you can use if you're doing performance, and then separately choreography, and then separately dance. And then on top of that, you have prop manipulation, fire dancing, flow arts. And so when you combine all of those 4 different art forms kind of together, or skill sets within art forms together, you can create magic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say, like, kind of my approach, and I guess part of that dance-based fire dance approach perhaps is like, I'm always creating my acts and my shows for the general public, and I have noticed that sometimes it feels like fire dancers are creating their acts for the fire dance community, because they might prioritize like a certain techie move that for someone who doesn't do or understand the tech would just be like less effective than some easier move, for example, or will look just the same as another move, So like, that's definitely a part of it too, is like, is approaching it as something, I don't know, kind of more grandiose or like meant for the larger audience. Yeah.
When you're creating dynamic and inspiring acts, what are other components you keep in mind?
Yeah. So, when I'm creating acts, like, I mean, it's not a full length show, so there's only so much story you can tell. But you can affect people emotionally. You can take them on a ride, at least an energetic ride. And so for me, I'll generally know what kind of act it is and what the ingredients are I kind of want inside. Although sometimes it works the other way, where like with the example of the light dance solo act in 2016, like, I didn't know that I wanted a cube. I just knew it had to finish with a bang. So then I brought the cube in, right? But generally, I'll kind of know what the ingredients are. And then I'll go hunting for music, and I'll spend a long time hunting for music, and then I'll finally find some music. I'll spend a long time cutting it. And then it's this whole process of like imagining, improvising, seeing what works. And then when I'm choreographing, what I think about is just kind of, what are the elements I'm working with, Like, I'm working with all the possibilities of this prop. I'm working with all the possibilities of my body, all the possibilities of how to move in the space and fill the space. I'm working with rhythm and speed, and those are all kind of like different spectrums in my mind. And then I've got the energy of the act. So maybe I think like, okay, I want to start off like slow and poetic and come up to a little, hillock, and then go back down into something more lyrical, and then take some momentum up for the bang at the end, because it's like corporate events or whatever, like they're looking for something wow a lot of times. So it's kind of an energy that works. But yeah, those are the few of the things I often think about when creating acts.
I love imagining these maps layered on top of each other in your mind, because there's so many different aspects that you're charting and that you have to choose from. What about when you're creating a stage story? What do you keep in mind first crafting the story itself?
So when I'm creating a longer story, and this is something I've just actually started doing not too long ago, but that I'm starting to feel pretty passionate about, I'm thinking about story logic. And what I mean by that is like, nothing is going to happen during that 45 minutes that is random or that's not connected to the show. Like, I want everything that happens to be connected and be there for a reason, and oftentimes, I think it's like working backwards. You kind of know the epiphany or the revelation you want people to have at the end, and then you get to kind of decide like how you're going to bring them there to have like the most effect, and how you're going to bring them there so they're going to enjoy the ride. So I think about that, and I also think about how to make it enjoyable, because like, for example, like I'm creating a new show, and there's this moment, it's like a kind of dark limbo moment, and like originally I was like, oh yeah, like it's gonna last like 2 or 3 minutes, it's just like flashing like annoying lights, but at a moment you have to be like, okay, well, like these people are actually there to like see a show and enjoy. so I actually shortened it to like be like a 30-second transition, which people still go to this emotional low of despair and limbo, but they don't have to wallow there for 3 minutes. So that's something I keep in mind too, is like trying to make things beautiful and poetic and enjoyable.
I'm so curious to know more about the current show that you're crafting. Are you willing to share a little sneak preview with us?
Well, here's the premise. After a cataclysm, humanity has to learn to work together to create a new equilibrium. So if if it sounds like kind of like what's happening today, that's exactly what it is. But it's something which is, you know, obviously without words. It's something which is, it's a 45-minute show. It's LED, there's aerial, there's serial, it's all LED, and we're using like kind of colors as symbols and puzzle pieces to put back together a broken equilibrium, which, you know, is kind of like the utopian times of different cultures from before. And then there's this period of cataclysm and mayhem, and it comes back up, you know, through finding all the missing pieces. And then because in 2021, we're not where we were 200 years ago, we actually all need to work together, and there needs to be a common vision. And so there's this last missing piece of the puzzle. And yeah, so I've just said a lot, but yeah, it's something that I feel really passionate about, because it's kind of like my vision for the better scenario for humanity. And so and then it's something I get to get like super creative and poetic with. So it's been a lot of fun creating.
What an inspiring and relevant vision and theme for a show, especially in these days and times when we're so divided and yet so connected. Performance often sparks conversation if it's done properly. And I feel like this one's going to lead to some really interesting conversations. So you've been fire dancing, playing with props for many years now. When do you frequently experience a flow state?
You know, when I can still remember, like when I first started fire dancing, like, you know, probably the reason why so many of us get into this and why it's so addictive is because we hit that flow state, you know, pretty fast, pretty early on. And just, you know, spinning props, like realizing like new places we can go with them, and then jamming to music and all this kind of stuff. Like that's definitely why I got into it. And then over time, like it just really shifted, you know, and that became something that like I'm almost not able to do anymore at all. And that was like a struggle for me for a while to like, like, why can't I like, you know, enjoy myself as I once did, like going out and freestyling. And I decided to learn that like, it's just something that's transforms for me, you know? So what happens now is that I feel a flow state when I'm performing something I've choreographed that I believe in. And when I get into this moment where I feel totally at one with what I'm doing, with the public, with the music, with the space, with myself, with my props, everything, when everything just kind of gels, that's my new drug. That's my new flow state, you know? And so there's that moment, and that's great because now, you know, when I teach retreats, you know, a lot of times people are coming and they're still where I was 20 years ago. They're like, oh yeah, why don't you light up, Sri? Like I'll put on some crazy music. And I'm like, that sounds great, but actually it doesn't sound great at all. Like, so what I've learned to do is be like, hey guys, like I'm not into that anymore, but here, let me present to you a work in progress. And this is how I feel, the same passion that you feel now about that. So that's been cool to evolve enough to realize that in myself. And then the other time I feel a flow state, which is awesome, and it's happening like every day now because we're in this pandemic and there's a silver lining in which I have a ton of time, is in creating, you know, like I get to just imagine and work on the story and like cut music and like pace around in my office and then go out into my backyard and like make things fit together. And so it's like choreographing, you know, whether it's myself or with the group, you know, that can be a flow state, or just writing a show and coming up with like things that are really meaningful for me that kind of all fit together. That's another kind of flow state.
It makes sense that, you know, that flow state would be activated, like time would slip away at a different point based upon the skill sets you acquired as you advance within your dance and within your performance itself. Then the choreography becomes the edge, and then the crafting of story becomes the edge rather than just the pure improvisation.
Yeah, actually, yeah, it's totally like that. And I think it's just natural, you know, like, and as I said, it was a struggle for me for years to be like, oh, like, am I losing my passion? Am I losing my art or something? But no, it's just natural. And I think like, after you freestyled so much with a certain prop, you kind of know the pathways and the channels and how you're going to interpret the music. You've kind of done it for years and experimented. And at least that's my experience. And so, I mean, occasionally it can still happen, right? But it's like once in a blue moon where I'll go out there with my poi with some live music, and it's like, okay, there's connection with the musicians, and there's something really alive and happening there, So it can still happen. But yeah, I think you're right. It is kind of a natural evolution.
And what do you wish you had known when you're starting out as a fire performer and artist? Like your top 5 things.
Like number 1, choose your battles and choose your projects. There are going to be so many possibilities and projects thrown at you through life, whether it's you thinking of them or people proposing them to you. And some are going to be worthwhile and some are not. So you have to learn to be able to say no, and kind of also like look forward, like try to look as far as possible down the road and see how this project is going to help you to meet your artistic vision, because you can easily get sidelined into projects and end up like spending 6 months on something that maybe was okay, but you should have spent 6 months doing something else. It would have helped you to go, quicker from point A to point B. So that's one thing I would say. And then, so that's like choosing your projects, choosing your battles. Like that's something I've really had to learn. Like, for me, up until like the last 5 years, like every single time I stepped on stage was some kind of like proof of my worth, and it took me time to learn to stop that, because like there are shows that are really important for you or for your career, or just for your, it's a passion project. But there are also shows where, maybe you're just performing at some club and people are going to be drunk at 3 a.m, and you don't need to waste your life like, like rehearsing for these kind of things. I mean, of course, you've got to maintain a certain level of quality for your shows. So it's not about lessening the quality, but it's something subtle that I've learned to do, which means like still allowing myself to have a life and a good quality of life, and choosing my battles. Like that show is really important. I'm going to work really hard to make it, so that's one thing I've learned. Another thing I would say is just to be resourceful. Like you have a vision, you have a goal, you have a dream. How are you going to make it happen? Like really plan it out. Like start writing on a piece of paper, and do research. Like that's something like, again, it has to do with the first point as well, but I wish I had done more of that kind of like foresight work. Yeah. And then lastly, like I would just reach out and say to anybody who's, maybe in a group, because I know this is how it started with me, at least. Like there's like a lot of semi-pro fire dance groups. And if you're somebody who feels stifled, maybe you feel you have a lot of talent, but you feel stifled by people in your group. Like, I just wish I could reach back to myself, 15 years ago and say like, go, like do it on your own. Like you don't have to like put up with these people. Like, you have your own vision. You might feel you have to keep working with them because they're the ones who have the resources or the know-how, but you can make it happen. Just think about the ways you can make it happen, and you can choose the people you want to create with. So maybe that's 5, I'm not sure.
I think so. And all of them have to do with mindset and really knowing what your goals and dreams are, and then planning for them, and not being afraid of changing directions or breaking away to do things solo or change groups. Just like, how can you be aware of what is going on in your mind and be conscious and intentional with how you're using your time and energy? So, in your opinion, what can we do, or perhaps are you currently doing, to support equity, diversity, and inclusion in our communities?
So I'm someone who believes that if you believe, if you're someone who stands up for social justice, who makes efforts for ecology, if you're someone who has certain beliefs, you're going to be able to have, an effect in your daily life, no matter what. There will be opportunities for you to stand up and give your opinion and stand your ground, So that's something that I do in daily life, to the detriment of people like running their motors or just throwing their cigarette butts out of their cars. But I do think like as far as like, how do I see that within the fire dance community? As I said, I'm not someone who like really interacts with the fire dance community on a regular basis. Like, I feel like we're in this critical moment, actually. Humanity is in this critical moment, and we need to start thinking of that community and how we can affect that community. And so I'm trying to do my part to, push us all in the right direction. So I'm thinking more about, the global community in this critical moment than I guess I am of the fire dance community.
In the stories that you craft and the shows that you create, in some way you're impacting that global community with every audience that you meet and perform before.
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, in best case scenario.
And what about when you're not creating and choreographing shows? What are your other, perhaps lesser known passions and hobbies?
Yeah. So, I have my hobbies. I mean, my first hobby is like travel. I always wanted to get out of the US and see the world, and I'm still doing it. So, travel, discovering new languages and cultures, like I'm super passionate about. And then along the way, getting into nature, anything to do with water. I love, snorkeling, scuba diving, surfing, skimboarding, like that's definitely my element. And then as far as passion goes, like maybe you've felt it so far, but like I'm definitely curious about, all the big questions, like how did we get here? Like how did it start? How will it end? What is our kind of, potential or destiny? And so, yeah, I'm quite interested in philosophy and quantum physics and, what the latest science is telling us about our universe.
So if you were an avatar character, you'd be a waterbender. And also philosophy questions and the big whys and exploring those. It seems like it's something that, again, cross translates over into what you create, because some of the shows I've seen you create and also the idea you're currently working on really deal with those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this comes down to what I've always hoped to do with my art, which is, as cheesy as it sounds, kind of like save the world, but like do my part in getting humanity to go on this path and not that path, So it's something which I've always aspired to do with my art. And as of yet, I've never felt that I really have. So I'm always, driven to get up in the morning at 6 every day for the last like 5 months to create this new show and to get to that place where I feel like I really am having an effect.
I have a big question for you to nom on. What is your ideal world?
Yeah, so, like humanity is like, I don't know, we are such like possibly angels, possibly demons, like I feel like we're at this moment in time where we're being asked this critical question, and we're testing things out, and like my ideal world, it would be, a world with more equality, more justice, more acceptance. There would be less like us and them mentality. There would be more inclusion. I think there's definitely work to be done with, we have a bill of rights. We everybody's talking about freedom, but nobody's talking about responsibility. So there actually is a bill of responsibility, but it's like nobody's signing on to it. So there's things that we have to figure out. So in my ideal world, we'll get to that point. We're still in prehistory as far as I'm concerned, and yeah, like this could be paradise. So let's do it. And then beyond that, I would say like, because I like to do this kind of zoom out thing where it's like finite within infinite, infinite within finite. There's chaos and it's all mayhem, but on some level, all is well, right?
Yeah.
We just got to ease the suffering a bit and, become custodians of the planet instead of destroyers.
With the goal to progress and move forward, to collaborate and become more communities that boost each other up and take responsibility, but we also are already where we're at because we're learning from our challenges. We're growing from our challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like humanity needs a new myth. like every culture had their myth. Religions supply a myth to the majority of humans alive today. Like atheists like me are very few and far between. But I feel like regardless of all that, like if we can all get like behind a new myth, a new vision that unifies us all, as cheesy as that might sound, like that's what we need. Like we need to all like have a common vision that we're inspired to do and to make happen. And so that we see people in the street and we recognize them as somebody who's also on the same path. We're all working together. It's not us and them. It's like we're all interconnected. So
I love it. I could spend hours talking about topics like this. But before we wrap up for this episode, I want to know, is there anything else you want to share with listeners?
First of all, if you're someone who's inspired to pursue kind of my style, well, it's not my style, but the style that I like to promote, dance-based fire dance, come on over, join the Facebook group. And then if you feel inspired to join one of our retreats, it's always a pleasure to have you. And I think I already talked enough about that. But and then I think like I just want to encourage people to, because that's one thing I didn't say, but it's important, I think. For years, I was, especially with my acts, because now I'm getting into doing longer shows, but especially with my acts, I had this kind of prejudice, or I was telling myself that I had to, that the public, they just wanted to see like fancy tricks and like wow moments, and they weren't concerned about who I was or, what I had to say, or kind of the emotional quality of me as a performer or my act. And that's totally not true. Like, and it took me years to realize that. And so I would just, as a last note, try to encourage people to really find your voice. And then once you found it, just say what you have to say, like really create like the show that you're the most passionate about, because ultimately, like, we're not really interested in like your tricks or the effects or any of that. Like, we want to like know what's the unique thing that you have to say.
Thank you so much, Srikanta. It's been an absolute pleasure. Folks, keep that in mind. It's not about the sparkle factor. It's about the message as well. And we'll see you in next episode.
Yes. Thanks for having me. Ciao.
You believe in a show that provides inspiration for artists and conversations on the creative process, please support the podcast on Patreon to keep it going. As a supporter, you can earn early access full-length interviews, submit questions for interviewees, be mentioned in an episode, and get a behind-the-scenes look at how the podcast is made. That's The Art of Flow if you're searching for it online. You can also follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook to receive shorter clips of episodes, updates, and notifications when new episodes are released.